In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the alternator on this Dodge Grand Caravan. Let's get started. While the coolant's draining, let's disconnect the negative battery terminal. Your battery is located on the driver's side of the engine compartment. Towards the firewall is the negative battery terminal, the other one is the positive. Use a 10mm socket or wrench and remove or loosen up this nut. You don't have to remove it all the way. Once you loosen it up, you should be able to pull this off the battery and set it aside so it can't make connection again. Now let's drain the coolant on the driver's side. You'll see this red plug right here. This is your radiator petcock, so we're gonna have to unthread that to let coolant drain out. Make sure you have a collection bucket underneath to catch all that coolant. Put a flathead screwdriver in here and turn it counterclockwise. You could also grab it with pliers if that's what you have. Basically, spin this until coolant comes out. Do not take it all the way out. Just let it drain like this because it's a more controlled drainage as opposed to taking it out, which will actually make things shoot straight out the back. Remove the radiator cap to let coolant drain a lot faster. With the coolant drained, let's close off the petcock. Make sure it's nice and snug. When you tighten this up, don't over tighten it, just snug it up a little bit. There is a rubber gasket in there that will seal everything up. Now let's remove the hose coming off the radiator cap fitting here. Remove it off of its two retainers. Now let's get this coolant overflow out of here. Just pull straight up on it. Move the engine cover out of the way. This will give you enough room to pull this out of here. Okay, and there's the overflow. On the passenger side of the fan assembly where your dipstick is, let's pop this connector off, unlock the locking tab. You can use a little screwdriver or pry tool for that. Sometimes they get stuck. There we go. This one's pretty much full of sand here. And then you should be able to press on the tab. That will allow you to pull the connector off. Slow and steady here. This connector is pretty stuck on there. And there we go. Now you can pull it aside. It's difficult to see, but right here there's a retainer holding this wire on that we just disconnected. Try to pop this off. And these are often very stuck on here. There we go. You got to pinch it really hard with the pliers and then you should be able to pop it off. Over here there's another one of these retainers. That one broke. That happens pretty often. Now before we unplug the fans completely from the connector all the way down there, I'm actually going to start pulling them up off the radiator because it'll be a lot easier to reach that when it's not all the way down there. Now let's disconnect the upper radiator hose, pinch the clamp, get it off of here, break this free, and set it aside. Now pull this wiring harness straight up. It has a couple retainers here. The reason for this is so that we can push it in more and get it out of the way of the fan assembly here. It will be pretty much impossible for me to show you this while I'm doing it, but on both sides of the radiator there's a clip that has to get pressed in and that will basically unlock the fan assembly. So as I'm about to pull this up, I'm going to press that tab in. As you can see, that unlocks it. This is the case on both sides, like I said. Now press on those two tabs that I showed you earlier. Let's pull this up. Keep in mind this wire is still attached here. Now at this point, we can more easily disconnect it. Lift up on this red locking tab. There we go. Press the center, pull up on the wire. All right, let's get this entire harness out of here. And now we can finish lifting the fan out of the way. With a 19mm socket, remove all 5 of your lug nuts and then pull the wheel off. Now we have to pull this splash shield off so you can get better access in there. I'm going to start with a trim tool. There are some push clips along the outer edges, one being in the front here. Just pop these off. Keep in mind a lot of times they will break, so if you have replacements, that's a good idea to replace them. And then one right over here securing the fender liner to this shield. Okay, was able to save that one. Then there are two 10mm bolts, one over here and one in there. Pull this off. Now with everything exposed, you can see the tensioner is right here. We're going to have to put a 3/8 drive tool right in the head of it to remove tension off the belt. For this, you could just use a ratchet. Pull counterclockwise. Slip that belt off. Oftentimes the belt just wants to fall immediately, so I'm just going to take it off, get it out of my way so I can work easier. Now if you look up from the front of the engine, but from underneath, you'll see that right up there above the AC compressor is going to be a gray connector on the back of the alternator. We have to unplug that connector. To do that, there is a red locking tab on it. Flip that back, and then you can press on the locking tab of the connector. Hopefully slide that out. All right. Then right above it, you'll see this black cap. Pinch it and remove it. This will expose our mounting nut for the main power wire going to our alternator. Take a 13mm wrench or socket, whatever you have, and let's remove this nut. It shouldn't be extremely tight. Once you break it free, you should be able to remove it by hand. There it is. Now take that wire, pull it off. There we go. Now at the front, you'll see two nuts holding on this plastic shield. Let's remove both of those so that we can remove the shield and then obviously remove the alternator. 13mm socket. Okay, there's one. All right, there's that second one. With that off, we can pull this shield off of the alternator. Take that down. Now with a deep 13mm socket, let's remove those two studs, well, I guess bolts that hold on the alternator. Break these free. These are pretty tight, unlike the other two nuts that we just removed. But once you break them free, hopefully you'll be able to spin them out by hand like this. Now on the pulley side of the alternator, there's one more mounting nut right here, also a 13mm. Break this free and remove it all the way. Now with an E7 inverted torque socket, you're going to have to pull this stud out so that we can actually get the alternator to slide forward. This being the last fastener, I'm going to hold the alternator so it doesn't fall. All right, there it is. Now from the top, pull the alternator out and up. Make sure you don't damage your radiator on the way up. There it is. There's your alternator. Take your new alternator, slide it down the exact same way the old one came out. Once again, pay attention to your radiator to not damage the fins. Drop it in place. I have a mounting bolt here ready so that I can fasten it to the engine. That way it doesn't move around on me while I try to get the other bolt or stud started underneath. All right, got it started. Put this bolt in as much as I can by hand because the steadier it is, the easier it's going to be to do everything else. And of course, I might as well start in the other one while I'm here. However, I will not tighten either of them because I still need this to move around to line up the lower one. Now underneath, let's put the stud in. Make sure you, of course, put it on the right way. The shorter threads with no cutout on the end goes in, and of course, the longer threads with the inverted torques goes towards the outside so you can actually thread it in. Oh, I got it started. All right. Perfect. Bottom it out completely. When it comes to studs like this, you just want to snug them until they stop spinning, and that's it. when you put the nut on and tighten it, that's actually going to pull both ends of the stud and therefore will torque it properly. Okay, that's snug. I'm going to give it a little extra, and that's it. I'm going to stop right there. Now let's put the mounting nut on. I'm not going to tighten this one first. I'm actually going to tighten the top 2 bolts first because those help position the alternator more than this stud. This one's just here to kind of clamp it on at the bottom. It's the top 2 bolts that really pull it up against the engine tight. So let's go tighten those up first. And here's a view from underneath of those 2 top bolts, or studs I guess, that we have to tighten up. The torque for all mounting hardware on this alternator is going to be 18 foot-pounds. Make sure these are close before I even put the torque wrench on them. There we go. And the second one. Now let's torque this mounting nut to 18 foot-pounds as well. Might as well connect the alternator now. Your main power cable, make sure it doesn't have a lot of corrosion on it. Mine is okay, so I'm going to slide it right back on here. If yours does have corrosion, make sure you clean it so that it's got a good connection. Otherwise you'll have some electrical issues. Your new alternator comes with a new mounting nut here, which is a locking nut, by the way. So slide this on, and when you do this, make sure this tab on the wire locks in to the side here. Otherwise it will actually not bottom out completely. It has to slide into the slot there. There we go. Now you want to tighten this, but be very gentle when you do. Otherwise you can break the stud of the alternator internally. That's snug or bottomed out right there. And I'm just going to snug it up with at most 1/8 of a turn, just a little bit. Now it's important to put this cap back over so it can protect that stud and the connection. There we go, snap that on. This will prevent debris from getting on there as well as corrosion from building up. And plug this in. Make sure that clicks and locks on. Lock that connector. And now let's get this shield on. Do not torque these to 18 foot-pounds because you will break the plastic. These just get snugged up a little bit. That should be plenty to hold this plastic on. That's it right there. Now let's get the belt back on. Here's a diagram on the screen of the belt routing. Doesn't matter where you start, as long as you get the belt on all the pulleys, of course. Okay, it's pretty much seated everywhere except for the water pump, and of course to do that we have to remove tension. So let's get our tool on the tensioner, 3/8 drive ratchet here. Release tension, slip the belt over, apply tension. Before we're done here, you always want to double check that the belt is sitting in all the grooves that it needs to. That's good. Everything's perfect, so I'm going to take this out of here. If you don't check it and it is off, it can actually either, well, damage the belt, but also it can fly off as soon as the engine starts and damage other components that are in the way. Let's get this shield up now. Line it up with the bolt holes. I like to put anti-seize on bolts like this so that they don't seize in the holes there. My front bolt is broken, so unfortunately I can't secure it there, but I can still secure it here and here with push clips. Tighten this one up. There we go. Let's get the wheel back on. Start on all 5 of your lug nuts, snug them up, and then in a cross pattern, torque them to 100 foot-pounds. Double check them if you want. Now grab your fan assembly, slide it down. Don't go too far. I want to connect the electrical connector up here before it goes all the way down. So to do that, I'm going to grab the plug, slide it on, make sure it clicks. There we go. Lock the red locking tab back down. There we go. Sometimes you need to tap it with something. And continue sliding this down move this harness out of the way as needed. All right. Make sure that on the bottom, that hook hooks onto the radiator on both sides, and then, meanwhile, on the top, this also has to line up and hook in. If you can pull the bottom away from the radiator, it's not locked in, it's not actually secured properly, so you have to redo it. Otherwise, air will not flow through the radiator, it'll get pulled underneath the fan, and it won't cool down the vehicle enough. Get this harness rerouted, attached, and plugged in over here. Make sure that clicks. Lock the red locking tab. There we go. Get the upper radiator hose resecured here. Grab the clamp, squeeze it, and set it back to where it came from. I like to line it up with the exact mark that it left. This gives it the best chance at sealing up again. Now, before you drop the tank down, keep in mind that these 3 notches have to line up with the coolant fan assembly. There are going to be some holes where these just slide in like that, kind of like a fork, but on the other side, and they catch onto these. So just keep that in mind. Slide this down. Press it tight up against the radiator. If you look, you can just barely see those lines. Tap it down. You should not be able to move it much at all. Resecure it on the fan shroud here and here, and reconnect it to the radiator. If you took your engine cover off, place it back on the engine. Put your negative battery terminal back on. When you touch it, it may make a spark. Keep that in mind. Tighten up this mounting nut with your 10mm socket. You know that it's tight enough when you can grab this terminal and not spin it by hand. This is plenty tight. If you crush this down, not only will it damage this, but it can also stretch the clamp. Now let's fill up the cooling system. Refer to your owner's manual for the proper type of antifreeze that you should be using. I also have this spill-proof funnel here, which is going to help me, well, not only not spill, but it's going to make this the highest point in the cooling system, which means air will naturally want to rise to the top. Let's fill this up all the way until it stops bubbling. To bleed the cooling system, we're now going to start the engine. As it runs, I'm going to turn the heat all the way to the hottest point on both. I'm going to turn the blower on low. We're going to want to make sure the AC is off. We don't want AC. I'll make it blow on the vents just so I can feel the heat. If you have rear HVAC controls, I'm going to do the same. Blower on low, heat on high. This will circulate all the coolant through the heater core. You're going to feel the heat once it warms up. And of course, as it does warm up, we're going to want to pay attention to our temperature gauge, which is on the left side of your dash. You're going to want to make sure it doesn't go past the halfway point. If it does, it's most likely an air pocket. So shut it off, let it cool down, and then start it back up. Once it warms up to full operating temperature, we're going to shut it off. Now let's cap this off. If you're using this funnel, it's easiest if you just squish on the upper radiator hose a little bit, plug up your funnel, and then remove it as you let go of the upper radiator hose. That will usually make it so that you're not spilling much at all. On the driver's side of your vehicle, near your battery, you'll notice this is your coolant overflow tank. If yours wasn't full all the way, like mine already is, you're gonna wanna add coolant until you reach the max line. Don't go over it, but make sure it's full. Now remove your coolant funnel if you used it, or the adapter at least, and put your radiator cap on. Make sure you click it on twice. It has 2 stages to it. There you go.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.